So it's now my pleasure to introduce Harriet Tregoning. Harriet was appointed Director of the District of Columbia's Office of Planning in 2007. She currently is spearheading projects to restore the capital city's waterfront, upgrade its water and sewer systems, refit its buildings with green roofs, and create green-collar jobs in environmental industries. She previously worked for the Governor of Maryland as the nation's first state-level cabinet secretary for smart growth. Prior to her tenure in state government, Ms. Tregoning was Director of Development, Community Environment at the US EPA, where she helped launch the National Smart Growth Network. Please join me in welcoming Harriet.
Good morning, everyone. I want to tell you how delighted and honored I am to be here at your conference. I'm a Walk 21 neophyte. I've never been to this conference before, but I've been really impressed at the quality of the presentations and particularly the quality of the questions and the engagement. So I know I have a very, very well-informed audience. It's also so great that Walk 21 is an international conference. We have people here not just from the US and of course Canada, but from 20 nations around the world. And Vancouver, what a wonderful setting for any kind of a conference. I think it's one of the most fantastic cities in the world, certainly in North America. It's thrilling just to be here. Many of you are actually from really wonderful communities around the world, and many more advanced, I would even say, than the city I'm going to talk a little bit about. But none of us would be here, would we, if our communities were as walkable as we'd like them to be, if they were as successful as we'd like them to be. So I'm going to talk about how we can take our communities, wherever they are, and make them more walkable, more successful, more wonderful places. Just a little bit about a smaller Washington, D.C., all the way on the other side of North America. We're a city of about 600,000 in population, and for us that's actually a number I say very deliberately because we had been losing population every decade for 5 decades, and this decade is the first time that we've had a population increase since the 1950s. And we're up more than 5%, and it was accelerating toward the end of the decade, so I'm very confident about our continued progress. We're in a region of about 4 million people, kind of complicated, because we have 2 different states that are right next to us, and anything that we want to do on a regional level means getting more than 20 local jurisdictions and essentially 3 states to try to agree. What the slide doesn't tell you and doesn't show you, because of the scale that it's at, that my city, like yours, is a city of neighborhoods. And what are neighborhoods? They're walking domains. They're places that you can get from center to edge, for most of them in about 10 or 15 minutes. This is my neighborhood. Columbia Heights is what it's called, or this is what my neighborhood used to look like until about 10 years ago. And it had looked this way for 30 years, ever since the riots in 1968, after the assassination of Martin Luther King. We had riots throughout the United States, but my city was particularly devastated, and there were several neighborhoods that really were leveled by these riots, and many of them, never came back or haven't come back until very recently. Not that there weren't efforts to revitalize them. I'd say every decade the city did some new, different thing to try to bring these neighborhoods back. But basically, you couldn't give the land away. There's nothing you could do to make it any less bleak or desolate. But part of what that meant was that a lot of the property became tax arrears because there was no profitable use for it. And so the city ended up with a lot of land in this neighborhood. So what we did just about 12 years ago was take those tax arrears properties and other land that we had acquired and assembled them into some large parcels. We did a great plan that really focused on the public realm. We guaranteed that we'd retain every bit of the affordable housing that was in this neighborhood and provide some more by rehabbing and incentivizing affordable housing. We opened a new metro station on a new metro line and enhanced the service of 8 bus lines that ran through this neighborhood. We brought in new shopping choices because we're a city that's frankly under-retailed. Probably most cities could say that, although in the US in general we have way too much retail. But we only have about 8 square feet of retail per capita in our city. The national average is in excess of 20 in the US, 20 square feet per capita. And there are lots of shopping choices that our citizens leave our city to find in the surrounding jurisdictions. We make about $1 billion in sales every year, so bringing those new choices back was important. And we brought them back in an urban big blocks cluster, the first kind of its kind, anchored by Target. We restored some historic buildings and supported cultural uses, and this is what resulted in less than 10 years. A pretty dramatic transformation. But I want to make 2 points about this. Not that it was successful, more that it was successful after several failed attempts. But even when I talk about success, we made lots and lots of mistakes with this project. We almost didn't get, one of the most important parts of it built, which is this wonderful plaza. It was really nip and tuck. We built way too much parking. We cut the parking requirement in half for this project and still ended up with 2/3 too much parking. So we really learned a lesson there. But we were able to do it because we weren't trying to do just one thing. We were trying to do lots of things. We were trying to revitalize a neighborhood. We were trying to bring new shopping choices. We were trying to increase our tax revenues. In Washington, like many other capital cities, a lot of land is off the tax rolls. We might have more than other places that are off. Only about, I would say, less than 60% of our land is on our tax rolls. So we have a difficult time sometimes balancing our budget. We wanted to attract new residents, which I think this project has successfully done. I mentioned we wanted to maintain and expand affordable housing. We also really wanted to increase the transit, the walking, the biking trips that took place and replace those automobile trips. And for each one of these objectives, there was a constituency. There was a group or set of groups who cared about those issues, sometimes to the exclusion of others. And by trying to do so much with this plan, with this project, we were able to get a lot of support. And because we had a lot of support, we were actually able to do it. So one of the things that we did was we also rehabbed historic buildings and brought in cultural uses like at this theater, like the Gala Hispanic Theater. So the principle that I really want to raise here is that an effort designed to meet many goals succeeds where a more typical revitalization effort. How many of your cities tried to bring in a stadium to revitalize your downtown? For example, just kind of a one-shot silver bullet thing. Well, that really doesn't work. So that's kind of the way we used to do it, right? 20th century math. Take one problem, seemingly solve it with one solution. This is the problem of school districts trying to find inexpensive land, to provide to basically locate a new school. But does this really produce a lower cost answer? Maybe in the short term it might for the school district, but obviously this isn't a walkable location. If anything, it's going to induce potentially that farmland all around it to become housing and strip shopping centers and demand services where the infrastructure doesn't exist. It'll sap the vitality from existing neighborhoods. It'll increase travel times and distances and carbon. This is how many schools all across North America are cited. And there's even a standard developed that requires a certain amount of square footage, a certain amount of acres for ideal elementary, middle school, and high schools that almost force you to be in this kind of a location. And we certainly heard from Gordon Price and many others about the most dominant example, automobility, what he was calling motordom. I mean, if this isn't a single answer solution to a problem of what? I mean, no one wants transportation for its own sake. Transportation is a means to an end. Well, this is all about speed, but not about all the other things that communities long to be. So what about math for a new century? If that's 20th century math, what does 21st century math look like? How many of you are from cities that have stormwater problems? Raise your hands. Okay, combined sewer, problems, older cities? Okay, that's a big, expensive problem, isn't it? And a lot of you might even be facing some legal pressures to resolve these problems, but everybody would like to. It's only a matter of money, right? So in the District of Columbia, we're thinking about spending something like $4 billion, that's with a B, dollars, on enormous pipes. Way, way, way larger than this. This wouldn't even be a feeder to the pipes we're talking about. Installed with machines the size of football fields. And the people who are going to operate those machines, first of all, those machines are obviously not local. They're not in our community. The people who would operate these multi-million-dollar machines, they're not going to hire any guy off the street to run that machine, no. And even if they did and train people up locally to run this equipment for the several years it'll take to do the project, when the machine goes, the job goes. Okay, so, and it's great to have those big pipes in the ground because stormwater we have to handle. So maybe 20 days a year when we have a rainfall more than an inch, we're going to have to use those pipes, and they'll be there, and that'll be great. There might be other ways to handle our stormwater problem. This is a solution that manages stormwater with every rainfall. So instead of 20 days a year, let's say it's 90. Okay, in the Pacific Northwest, it'd be like 300 days a year, right? So you really have an incentive to think about a different way to do this. But we don't have the really super heavy rainfalls so often, but we have rain, a lot of rain. With this solution, we end up with trees that provide shade. As Alan Jacobs talked about, trees are the most wonderful things to create a great walking environment. They cool buildings. This solution creates habitat. It buffers pedestrians. It's beautiful. Interesting things happen in these little green spaces. There are benefits that you get every day. And guess what? It doesn't require a lot of skill to build these facilities. And so you could hire someone locally to do that. And that they have to be maintained. So it's kind of an ongoing need that you have, and in this case, an ability to employ. And you still might need pipes, some pipes. But if you use this solution, they'd be a lot smaller pipes. And you'd use them even less frequently. So what about that? What about solving a problem? And instead of getting just one answer back, solve 4 or 5 other problems while you're doing it. Well, this is something that that I've come to understand, that there's a secret word. Okay, there's a secret ingredient. There's a secret question I've started to ask myself as a reminder to use this new math. What is that secret word? It's walkability. If you are solving what you think of as your main problem and you're also solving for walkability, you are actually solving for many other problems. Many, many other problems. And so many of the dollars that we're already committed to spend, we could spend so much better if we also tried to solve for walkability. So how does this work? You have to start asking the question about what are people's aspirations. This is a lesson I learned when I worked at the Environmental Protection Agency. I was a fervent environmentalist. I was really into it. I thought that was the greatest job in the world to work at EPA. And it wasn't just important to get people to do things, it was important why they did things. I was always trying to get people to do it for the environment, okay? And it took me a long time to realize that, the environment doesn't care why people do it. It only cares about the outcome. So if they have a different reason for doing what I would like them to do, well, that's actually totally great, And so this is really true for the issue that we're talking about. So let's answer this question. What do cities aspire to? We're all talking about working in communities where there are big, important people, decision makers, colleagues, elected officials, people who are maybe currently opponents, but as I like to think of them, potential future allies, right? So, what do they? Let's hear. What do cities aspire to? Let's hear it. What do you think?
Livable city.
Livability. Okay. What else? Jobs.
Tax revenue.
Tax revenue. Yep. Friendly. Safe.
Businesses.
With businesses. Yes. Beauty.
Balancing budgets.
Culture. Balanced budgets. Food. Sorry?
Fun.
Fun, all right. Well, okay, exactly. They aspire to health, wealth, and happiness. Couldn't we put everything we just heard into those bundles, right? We could do that. That's what they aspire to, all right? So let's talk about the aspirations of cities, and let's try to think about how we would get a more walkable outcome by dealing with other people's aspirations. So what is a healthy city? We heard a lot of this already. It's a city that's safe. Safe is a big deal. People are fit. We minimize the pollution. And we try to address Jim Salas's big budget buster, chronic disease, right? There are a lot of people in cities who don't really care about the disease, but they care about the payments that have to be made to basically care for the people who have the disease. So think about what is it that my future ally wants to do, and how can I make them wildly successful in doing it? And another example from downtown DC. They didn't realize they had a walkability problem. They thought they had a safety problem, right? That the streets were empty at night. There were a lot of blank walls and streets that people were afraid to walk down. Not much happening there at night at all. No one lived there. Lots of surface parking, and it looked dirty. People just felt uncomfortable being there. So what happened was just 12 years ago, the city created its very first business improvement district. We now have almost a dozen of them. We rezoned the city, this part of the city, to require housing. Any new office that was going to be built had to prioritize housing as well. We changed the rules to make sure that we had vibrant retail in the ground floors of every building. We opened a new metro station and provided a lot more of those kinds of choices. And we ended up with a much cleaner, much safer downtown, but also a downtown that now has 10,000 residents and growing, where it's become a destination for people to come after work because there's so many cultural offerings and so many things to do. We have our arena for basketball and hockey that's there, and 75% of the people who come to it come by metro. They don't drive. And then they walk to all the restaurants in the neighborhood. So it's been fantastic. And there's a lot more walking in this neighborhood, and since a lot more people live there, if you work downtown, and we have more than 700,000 jobs downtown, it's fantastic. You have one of the best commutes in the entire region. So we saw this from Larry Frank yesterday, that, we haven't changed, well, maybe we have. But I mean, our ability to walk hasn't evolved out of us in the last 100 years. That our cities, most of our cities have an infrastructure for walking that people used 100 years ago. They actually used it. That was how they got around. We haven't changed, but what has changed is our norms. It's not normative to be physically active anymore. It's not normative to think about walking and biking and taking transit as choices that people can delight in making. We talk about people who are a transit-dependent population. That sounds tragic, doesn't it? When in fact it's actually wonderful to have those options. So like your city, I'm sure, we have a network of great streets. Ours are kind of even famous, some of them. This is the L'Enfant plan. And, this is a network that's more or less survived intact for a really long time. Although we're doing a lot of the work that our last presenters were talking about. In the 50 years of bad planning and bad development that happened before now, a lot of those streets ended up being mega blocks. We had redevelopment in areas where we took streets out of the grid, and it's been my personal mission to restore as many of those streets as possible. And we're up in the 20+ street segments that have been restored. But it's a great network of streets. But how do you get people to walk them? We heard a little bit just now from Alan Jacobs and from Mary Beth that you need destinations. You need activity, you need safety, you need eyes on the street. And I would also argue that you need lots of transportation choices. lots of them. We have more than 700 Zip cars in the District of Columbia with more than 60,000 members. New premium transit that gives us 10-minute headways all day. Great technology that we did in-house that tells a program called Where's My Bus to let people know when the bus is coming. So even in the off-peak hours, you can actually plan to go to a movie or go downtown taking the bus, which you would have never done before because you might wait an hour for a bus to come. But if you know a bus is coming in 30 minutes, you've got stuff to do at home or at the coffee shop that you're at or wherever. You can plan around that. So it's made a huge difference in terms of those non-rush hour trips. And my favorite new choice that we have, is our bike share program. We were the first to have bike share in the US, not the first in North America. But the interesting thing about this, and I have to say, we think it's really cool and really successful. It's operating in the black on the operating side, which is pretty cool, mostly because we've had something like 60,000 tourists use it for a day or a week or a month, 18,000 annual members, and 1 million rides in our first year. So, really excited. I call it our first year, but it wasn't really our first year. We actually had a smaller system that began 2 years before this one did, and it was a spectacular failure. It really didn't work at all. It was only like 10 bikes, or 10 stations, 100 bikes. It wasn't big enough. The bikes were really kind of goofy looking. We tried to like it. I used it, but it didn't really work. It didn't have the scale. But that's a lesson too about this. What all of us want to do is pretty audacious. We want to transform our communities, transform them in the most basic possible way, and change everybody's attitude about what constitutes the good life and how physical activity and walking is part of that good life. So we have to be audacious. We have to be bold, and we have to fail sometimes, really fail, because if we're not failing, then we're not stretching high enough. We don't have an ambitious enough goal if we don't sometimes fail. So I love failure. And I like to see it every once in a while, followed by success. Okay, so there's an example. Okay, so I love transportation in part because, as you know, every part of a transit or bike trip is a walk trip, especially for bike share. We don't have so many stations. We won't even when we have 10,000 bikes, which we don't yet have. You're still going to have to walk to get from the bike share station to where you want to go. So I consider all these things pedestrian assists. We prioritize the pedestrian. That's the most important trip. That's the most vulnerable traveler. So if we make it safe for the pedestrian, if we make it accessible for the pedestrian, everyone else is going to benefit. And that is how we have to think about it. So, the wealthy city. Who doesn't aspire to wealth, at least secretly, yeah? Comfort. Let's be comfortable. Let's be fiscally stable. Let's be vibrant. Let's be competitive. And in this economy, in these times, let's be resilient, right? Let's be able to weather tough times. Okay, let's do that. So back to Columbia Heights. This project really showed us a lot of things, including, how all those blue buildings are new development that's been added. So the city invested by throwing in this land, and a lot of other people stepped up to invest. And this is not counting all the rehab that's been done in row houses all around here. And this was one of the areas that more people moved in the last census than any other part of the city, moved to this area of Columbia Heights. So guess what? We have new taxpayers, which with our tax base, that's really important to get their income tax. And if we get their income tax, and in their new houses we got their property tax, we're also going to get their sales tax. And that's been fabulous for us. So this is an example of how that kind of an investment and the way we invested has brought great returns for the city. But a lot of people, when they look for a place to live, have you heard the term drive to qualify? Yeah, all right, well this is why. This is housing costs. You see us kind of in the middle there. We're not even that dark. The darker the color, the more expensive, right? But fully half of our city is pretty dark, and there are lots of other places that are more lightly colored at the edge. So a lot of people in our region, they drive to find a home. They think that's a great thing, that they can find cheaper housing, get more housing. It's a phenomenon around the world. So we started looking at combining the two biggest costs for households, housing and transportation. This is work that we did with the Center for Neighborhood Technology in Chicago. These are the average transportation costs. Remember those light areas on the edge? Look how dark they are for transportation. In some of these jurisdictions, those transportation costs are actually higher than their housing costs. But no one is asking them when they go for a loan what they're paying for transportation unless they're holding it as debt, unless they have a car payment. If they don't have a car payment, nobody knows how much they're spending on transportation. And if you put those two things together, the district doesn't look so bad, but those outer-lying jurisdictions, they don't look so good either. And it's no coincidence that when you change the definition of affordability, one of the things that happens is the places that seem most affordable in the region are considerably less affordable. And in some cases, that means that you can't hang on to your home. When times get tough, you have no choice out on the edge. You have no choice but to drive. And so the foreclosure rates, those bottom three counties are our furthest flung jurisdictions in our region. And they had the highest foreclosure rate for a reason, not just predatory lending that was part of it, but it was because they had no flexibility, no resilience. And now those local governments don't have much resilience. Property values have plummeted in those jurisdictions. And a lot of houses even now stand vacant or are set for another round of foreclosure. So let me quickly go on. Someone said happy, earlier. We were talking about happiness in one of the other sessions. And happiness is incredibly important. And a happy city is inclusive. It's beautiful. Someone said it's fun. It's convenient. It's connected. We're a city like a lot of cities. We have a ton of disparities. Health, education, wealth. It's something that prevents a lot of people in our city from being happy. In considering whether and how to add more transit service, in this case streetcar, we explicitly are asking the question, how do we reduce those disparities? How do we provide more job access? How do we design our system so that more people who need jobs can get to the job centers? How do we design the system so that we guarantee permanent affordable housing along this transit line so that even if you don't have a lot of money, you'll always be able to live along transit? How do we improve shopping access and education access? And how do we treat this situation in neighborhoods where it's mostly renters versus mostly homeowners? Because the renters are the most vulnerable if property values increase when we make this investment. So these are the kinds of questions we're asking ourselves even as we look at transportation. How do we make a city beautiful and convenient, with compact development, with interesting streetscapes, with parks and wonderful public realm? Convenient with retail in every neighborhood. We use WalkScore to create a baseline for our neighborhoods when we do our small area plan, because everyone specifically wants more convenience in their neighborhood. That's an aspiration for every community I've ever done a plan for. Including, bringing our newest thing, food truck vending, to a lot of neighborhoods that otherwise don't have any access to those kinds of food services. And of course, lots more choice with Capital Bike Share. I was going to read you a testimonial, but let me talk about luxury. What is more luxurious than choice? Is there anything? That's the most luxurious thing, to be able to have lots and lots of choices. And cities that do that make their citizens feel luxurious because they have choices, not just at every intersection, as Alan talked about, but in how they choose to spend their day that day, how they choose to get around, what they choose to experience. And we need to give people choices in walking, because there's not just one kind of walking. We have to be connoisseurs. This is the kind of walking you do for exercise. You have tennis shoes or a dog. We have this kind of walking. These people are not out there for fun. The facilities you build for that kind of utilitarian walking are very different. We have walking where you see the sights. You go with a date. This is a postprandial stroll, right? Beautiful places for strolling where no utilitarian walker is going to mow you down. We have a lot of young people in our city, and I think everyone aspires to have that. You need places where they can see and be seen, right? Where they can see each other, they can hang out. That's what this is. This is my old neighborhood, Adams Morgan. Too much promenading for me. And then special event walking. This is a particular type that's unique to capital cities, I think. But you need those places in every city. So let me just close by saying, we know who the indicator species is. If you want a great city, it's the pedestrian. Thank you.
Thank you very much.